awful. What are we going to do about this? Right? And I said, it is awful, Armin, and let's see what we can do. So we joined together with probably about 400 other local governments across the country who've kind of joined into this kind of compact of saying we're still in, we're going to work on climate resources as if the Paris Climate Accords were still in place, and going to try to do whatever we can to minimize and mitigate our climate footprint. So this is one of the reasons why the Green New Deal is so important, because it shouldn't be left up to local governments to have to deal with this. This is a national, international, global problem, and to have the United States, which is the largest economies in the world, one of the largest emitters in the world, as an entity, not work on climate is just incomprehensible. So the fact that local governments have to work on this is just kind of where we're at right now, and hopefully we'll be at a different place in the near future. So let me walk through our climate change action plan, and we can take questions at the end after Jonathan's presentation too. So one of the things we've worked on is just trying to think through what our greenhouse gas emissions are out of the county. Since 2010, we've been able to go back and look at how many, what our emissions are in different sectors of kind of the economy. Basically, we're looking at natural gas, electricity, transportation, waste, and industrial processes. And one of the things we found, interestingly enough, is that since 2010, we've had about a 12.5% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions attributable to individuals in Cuyahoga County, if you do it on a per capita basis. I'm sorry, about a 10% if you do it on a per capita basis reduction. And a lot of that is in the energy sector, in the electricity sector specifically, because people become just more energy efficient for the most part. We're using a lot more LED light bulbs. Appliances are a lot more energy efficient. Natural gas has displaced coal for the majority, or close to the majority of kind of generation mix in our electricity sector. There are some more renewables in the mix. So just overall, we've seen a reduction in our greenhouse gases by 12.5% since 2010. We need to go a lot further, obviously, and that's one of the things we're working on. The other stuff we wanted to look at was how is climate change already affecting us in the county? So this is some data that the Midwest Regional Climate Centers put together, and Monica especially has kind of been able to go through and kind of dig through it on just at a Cuyahoga County specific analysis. And if you look at the bar chart on the left, or the bar on the left, the 100-year average for all temperatures over the course of a year are about 50.725 degrees. If you take every temperature every day, every minute, that's what it averages out to over the last 100 years. But then if you start looking at the last 30 years versus in the last 10 years, you can see that there's an absolute increase in per Fahrenheit of the degrees that of the average temperatures over the last 30 years and over the last 10 years. So the last 10-year period, we're at 52.5 degrees, which is almost a 2 degree increase over the last 100. And if you look at it, just kind of the increase from 100 to 30 to 10, you're seeing that increase is happening at a quicker pace. So that is something that is obviously worrying us. You can see this also this is a chart that the Arbor Day Foundation puts out, and this is from 2015. But one of the ways you can see this is just our growing zone has already changed. So in 1990, we were in growing zone number 5. As of 2015, the growing zone has changed, and we're in growing zone number 6, which means that we've got a elongated time frame in which to grow stuff. Basically, we're seeing less frost. Frost is coming later in the fall, and thawing is happening earlier in the spring. So that's temperature. The other thing we've measured is precipitation. How much rainfall and melted snow is hitting our area, our county, and kind of the same mix, so the 100-year average versus the 30-year average versus the 10-year average. And we are seeing, as you can tell, the recent 10-year average has seen about a 7.5 inch increase if you compare it to the 100-year average, which is about 17%. And it's seen a 3 1/3 inches increase over the last 30 years, which is a 7.5% increase. But you can see that chart is going up quicker over the last 10 years, which we believe is attributable to climate change. And the other part of this is, by the way, is that we're seeing more. Well, we're seeing more precipitation. We're also seeing it in more extreme or more kind of dramatic storm events. So the 100-year average, the number of storms where there would be more than 1 inch of precipitation in any event was about 6. The last 10-year average is almost 8. So over the 100-year period, we're seeing a 26% increase in a more kind of violent storms or more dangerous storms. Here's just another indication of that. This is a chart put out by the Great Lakes Environmental Research Laboratory out of Ann Arbor. And what they do is they measure ice coverage on the Great Lakes. So this chart shows that Lake Erie has seen about a 50% reduction on an annual basis in ice coverage from 1973 to, I think this goes through 2017, through 2017. And that's on Lake Erie. And the Great Lakes as a whole have seen about a 69% loss in ice coverage. And so people are still trying to figure out what this, what this means. I was at a conference last year with the Environmental Law and Policy Center in Chicago, and there's a lot of smart scientists from all over the Midwest who are just kind of working on climate change issues. And so we're seeing more precipitation, we're seeing less ice coverage over the course of a year. It may mean, and probably means, we're going to see quicker evaporation happening. So ice coverage tends to help out with evaporation issues in spring and early summer. If you've got less ice coverage, it means you may see more evaporation, which may mean to more coastal erosion. As folks have seen, we're at some of the highest lake levels Lake Erie's seen in a long time. One of the things we've looked at in terms of just temperature is where there will be heat island issues. So heat islands are areas where there are, if you compare, kind of industrial areas, places where there's not a lot of trees, where there's a lot of dark areas, then when you've got a 90-degree day, it may be 95, 100 degrees closer to the area where you're at, as compared to places where there's more trees, more kind of vegetation, more water systems. So we've got a nice map now that someone from the University of Akron helped put together a couple years ago, just on looking at the county and looking where the high heat areas are in the county, and where we should be most concerned about when we've got those high heat days. And we're going to see a lot more high heat days in the future. Our health department has started looking at this as well. So how does climate change affect just the health of people living in Cuyahoga County? So we believe there's going to be elevated levels of medical responses due to heat-related illnesses. More people are going to suffer and die from illnesses and complications related to excessive heat than they do from cold weather. Vulnerable groups include elderly, the infants, and children under the age of 5, and poor, veterans, and ethnic minorities suffer more. And one of the things that there's kind of good studies on, I guess, is that there's a kind of an increase in violent crime when temperatures increase to 95 degrees or above. So as we get more high heat days and more 90, 95 degree days, those are things that law enforcement just needs to be cognizant of and be ready for, because people have shorter patience, kind of a little bit more edgy. It's harder to sleep at night, maybe, especially if you don't have air conditioning. So those are things that just kind of put people over the edge in some respects. The other part of this, by the way, it's not in the chart. I should have added it, but we're also going to see, actually, the Plain Dealer did a good story in this a couple years ago. We're going to see more nights where it doesn't get under 70 degrees at night. So one of the things the body needs to do is to cool down during the day or during the night after a high heat day. So if you've got less nights where it's under 70 degrees, or more nights where it doesn't get under 70 degrees, it's harmful in terms of health impact for people. Some of the other things that the health department is looking at is just, just kind of the potential diseases that are going to be affecting us, and so different viruses are going to be, we may be seeing. So vector-borne diseases are diseases spread by bugs, mosquitoes, insects. If you've got longer growing seasons for crops, it probably also means you've got longer growing seasons or longer breeding seasons for insects. And while there's, usually kind of a small percentage of insects carry any kind of a disease associated with them, if you've got longer growing seasons, then you've got more absolute insects that potentially carry those diseases. So that's one of the things they're looking at. They have already seen kind of increases in West Nile virus. And in Ohio, there's, if you go to their website, actually, they've got charts on this. And then they're starting to see things that have never cropped up in Ohio before. So something like the La Crosse encephalitis. There's a kind of a California virus that's taking place. And then some of these diseases that are travel related. So you got chikungunya, which I hear is just this terribly painful virus that you can catch. We've never been seen before in Ohio. We've had our first case in 2018. Dengue, malaria, 50 cases of malaria in 2018. It's remained to be seen. We're obviously in the middle of a global pandemic with coronavirus. And I haven't seen any kind of direct kind of studies or correlation on climate change and coronavirus, but I think that's something that folks may be able to posit later on, or we kind of discuss, is to think about how climate change may have or had any impact on coronavirus. I think that's stuff we're going to have to remain to be seen. So the county is, we're taking this seriously, and in the absence of federal action and in the absence of state action in a lot of respects also, that we feel like we have to do a lot of work. And so we've put together our climate change action plan. We're looking at reducing our greenhouse gas emissions coming out of the county. We'd like to be at net zero emissions by 2050. That's the goal. We've kind of got 5 different topic areas that we're looking at: energy, transportation, natural systems, health, and land use. And if you want to look at our complete plan, it is on our county planning website, the Cuyahoga County Planning website. And it kind of walks through the whole plan. And the plan was put together not just by county planning or sustainability, but we had worked with the probably about 25, 30 groups.
I'm good.
Are you gonna come?
Getting some background noise there. So in terms of energy, we'll start there. So we, as I say, we want to be 100% renewable by 2050. Electricity and natural gas make up about half of our total emissions right now. We've kind of walked through, I'm going to walk through a couple of the programs we're working on in the county, but they include residential, municipal, commercial, renewable energy. We're working on a microgrid. We've had this landfill solar project that we put together that we're fairly proud of. So I'll walk through those real quick. Some of you may have been to meetings in the past, but we've worked with Solar United Neighbors to put together a residential solar co-op. Our next co-op round will start in probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, actually. We just ended one in February, but basically it's group buying, group procurement of solar for homeowners, can be small businesses as well, and it's it helps reduce the cost of going solar by 15 to 20%. And the nice thing about it is you're doing this, you're getting kind of educated in a community. You're doing the request for proposals as a community, making kind of democratic decisions on who should, you're looking at bids and making democratic decisions on who wins the bid. We think it's a really great program. We've run it for the last 3 years now, and this will be year 4. And we've had probably about 125 households in the county go solar, including myself. I did it the first year. For me, it cost $10,000 to put 12 panels on our rooftop. We got a 30% federal tax credit last year, so net $7,000, and it's covering about 43% of our electricity needs over the course of a year. So we used a county help loan, which was less than a 2% interest rate, and so we figured that the payback for us is around 10 years in terms of the reduction in our energy costs because of the solar panels in our loan. And the panels are guaranteed or warranted to last at least 25 years. So they'll produce 80% of what they produced in year 25 as they do in year 1. So that's a residential solar co-op. We're also working, the county has buildings that it owns and operates. And so last year we did a bid and a request for proposal, and AEP Solar won the bid, and they are AEP On-Site Partners, won the bid. And so they've installed solar panels on 2 of our buildings right now. The animal shelter in Independence and the medical examiner's building in University Heights currently have solar panels. The Harvard Road Garage is scheduled for fall, and we just amended the contract to include our GND Hunter Social Services building, which is on East 40th and Euclid. And so those buildings we're doing solar through what's called a power purchase agreement, where the county doesn't have to put any upfront money. We're not, in fact, we won't even own these things. Someone else will own them, put them on our rooftop, and the electricity that is generated, they basically get a customer and us. So they sell the electrons to the county, and it's net metered off of our bill, which we pay from the utility. So basically, we're paying for this by signing a long-term contract to agree to buy the electricity that's generated from these panels. And our estimate is that we'll save at least $600,000 a year in electricity costs over a 20-year period. That the electricity that's being generated from these solar panels is lower than what we're paying for off the grid. And so by a small amount, right? But the inflation factor of grid power will go up higher than what the guaranteed rate of the inflation factor is for these panels. So we're going to be saving a lot of money over the future. The other thing about this is we allowed local governments to piggyback off of our procurement process. So some of you know in government, procurement can be a hard thing to do. It's time consuming, and especially for something kind of unique like this, it can be difficult. But by allowing local governments to piggyback off our process, basically they can just take advantage of the contract that we created with AEP. So Lakewood has 4 buildings that they're going to go solar on. Cleveland Heights has 3 buildings, I think, that they're going to go solar on. We've got a couple other local governments that are looking at this as well. We think that we'll get about at least 3 to 4 megawatts worth of electricity generated from this power purchase agreement model. One of the other things we're looking at is a microgrid. So one of the things, as climate change occurs, we'd like to be as resilient as possible. So if the larger grid goes down, we'll have a grid, at least at the downtown area starting off, that will be able to be kept up. So we're working with the Cleveland Foundation and Cleveland Public Power to develop this microgrid, basically, so that mostly for right now, it'd be commercial entities, businesses could come in, tap into the microgrid, and have high reliability for power needs. So it's 99. It's called 5-9 power, 99.999% uptime in your power needs with this microgrid. So we're excited about this. We've pre-qualified 8 developers who are some really high-powered and well-financed developers to come in, and we're just kind of ironing out the details on what our request for proposal will look like. But we hope to get that out hopefully by early June. The other thing is I wish I could tell you the government had all the money and we could just do this stuff without any problems and pay for things, but we don't. Especially at the local level. At the national level, there should be and could be a lot of money available for renewable energy, but at least at the local level, and counties and cities have been and are struggling with local budgets. But one of the things we've been working with the Cleveland Foundation and the Gunn Foundation is trying to create a fund that would just be available to help with clean energy projects. And this first iteration we're talking about is just solar on commercial structures, kind of emulating what we did at the county with this power purchase agreement model, but allowing allowing commercial entities to take advantage of it. So it's not like huge scale projects like our one in Brooklyn, but projects that are kind of medium to small size rooftop solar projects, like between 100 and 500 kilowatt capacity projects. So green banks are kind of this interesting animal. New York has one, Connecticut has one, Michigan has a version of one. California, Nevada have green banks, and so they're basically funds that are just available to help finance at low interest rates, kind of long-term projects, do more kind of credit enhancement for projects that may be on the margin to help get projects up and off the ground and for affordable rates for people. We would be the first county level green bank in the country. So we had worked with a group called the Coalition for Green Capital to help put together kind of this feasibility analysis, and they just came out with it last week. This was a story that Cleveland.com put up, with the Midwest Energy News ran, and it talked about the doubling our ability to do solar in 5 years with a green bank, a decently financed green bank. So there should be more news on this to come in the next couple of weeks, and just kind of setting up this entity and starting to capitalize it. But we think there's a real opportunity with the green bank. And this is just something I'm proud of, is our Brooklyn landfill solar project. So we put 35,520 solar panels on a landfill in the city of Brooklyn, and are running that electricity through lines, Cleveland Public Power lines, into county buildings, basically. And so it's a unique use of land that you can't use for anything else. Landfills have real strict rules around what you can do with them. Ironically, one of the things you can do is put solar panels on them. So Brooklyn was kind of the first project. Actually, we were out in another cities. There's another landfill in another city we were at today that is really kind of starting to look at a second landfill project. And one of the reasons we're proud of this is we won, and this is my ego. This is a picture of me and Armin, but we won this. It was the Solar Builder magazine Gold Project of the Year award in 2018 for our landfill solar project. And one of the reasons they gave it to us is it wasn't the biggest project in the world, but it was complicated. We had to go through a whole bunch of different kind of hoops and ladders to get it done, but we did it, and we think we've created hopefully a template for other projects. Okay, transportation is a big issue. It's a big emitter of greenhouse gases, as most folks know. We've helped bring in kind of the bike sharing network, the old bike share system. We've helped bring in scooters. Working with our county planning department, we put together this they put together this county greenway plan, which we're trying to help with resources for helping to develop. But the big thing I think is really important is just electric vehicles. EVs are a lot more fuel efficient vehicles. I wish I could tell you that I'm confident that we're going to just do a huge mode shift and people are going to start riding RTA or riding their bikes to work, or we're going to be a denser community all of a sudden within the time frame that's needed. But I'm not confident of that. But one of the things that I think can happen and should happen quickly is kind of a change in at least allowing for more electric vehicles in our community. And to that end, we've worked with NOACA, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, to put some money in their budget. They've got about $3 million that they're going to be spending over the next 2 years just on infrastructure improvement, which means a lot of it means just charging stations. We are woefully behind in Cuyahoga County in terms of charging station infrastructure. Most of the, not all of the vehicle manufacturers are gradually shifting, or will be gradually shifting over to electric vehicles in the future. And, we're doing both ourselves a disservice in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction, but also choices that we're giving to consumers here if we don't have the infrastructure in place to allow people to take advantage of electric vehicles. So changing, really ramping up EVs is really important. Okay, trees, and the county council and Executive Budish agreed last year to put $1 million a year into our tree canopy. Our tree canopy is low compared to what it should be. We're countywide, we're at around 34% of tree coverage. Trees are really important for a lot of reasons. They improve water quality, they help with stormwater runoff, they save energy, especially in hot days. They help with minimizing the need for air conditioning. You reduce air pollution. There's a lot of good reasons why trees are this kind of low-tech system support for reducing climate change with issues and helping with climate change, I guess. So we put $1 million into tree canopy, and we've agreed to do this for 5 years, or $1 million a year for 5 years. The city of Cleveland has agreed to do $1 million for 10 years. The goal for most communities, urban communities, is to have about a 40% tree canopy. We're average in the county, we're at about 34%, but we've got a lot of cities that are way lower than that. Cleveland is under 20, Park is under 20, Randall's under 20, and then a lot of cities in between 20 and 25%. So planting more trees is really important and something that we're working on. And here is a graph that I know it's really hard to see, but you can look on our county planning website that looks through every city in the county and what their tree canopy coverage is. Okay, getting close to finishing up here on my side. The other thing we've worked on is just on plastic bags are a huge nuisance, and they are one is we know we live on Lake Erie, and it's a great natural resource, and that we've got a lot of plastic pollution in this community, and a lot of plastic that gets into the lake and biodegrades or not bio, but degrades and gets into our water supply. So there's been a real push to reduce the amount of plastics in the community, but also plastic bags in the community. On average, bags are used about 12 minutes per piece. In some instances, they take up to 1,000 years to degrade. And in Cuyahoga County, we've kind of looked at industry figures, and there's over 319 million plastic bags that are given out from stores in the county on an annual basis. So county council put together a plastic bag ban starting, it was supposed to begin January 1st of 2020. That enforcement, because of coronavirus issues and concerns, is being pushed back to January 1st, 2021, just so you know. And then just lastly, a couple other things. So, we talk about, our place in the world or our place in the United States. We're actually kind of in this interesting place, and and we've got the Great Lakes in our backyard. And, we've been seen as the kind of the Rust Belt, and where there's been a lot of deindustrialization and flight out of our area. I think one of the interesting things now in an age of climate change and more violent storms and more high heat and more precipitation in some areas is that we're actually in a kind of an interesting place in the world. So this is a map on natural disasters, but there's also one kind of equivalent on that I don't have it here, I apologize, but it talks about climate resiliency and climate change impacts. But we're in a better place than a lot of other places in the country. The Southwest has, just in the middle of a 50-year drought, and they've got wildfires, they've got utility shutoffs, during the summer. The East Coast and the Southeast is both, they've got huge, issues with, storms and violent storms. And especially the Texas area and Florida region in the summer, they don't get under 95 degrees during for 80, 90 days, in a row in the summer sometimes. So we're in a more kind of, I think, climate resilient place naturally by our location, and it's something we're just trying to understand better. A couple of just issues that I know that this is stuff that climate, the kind of major credit reporting agencies and insurance companies are actually starting to factor this into kind of how they rate companies, rate cities, rate geographies for their climate resiliency, or what insurance rates could potentially be for businesses or entities that are located in areas where there's more problems with climate change. So these are just a couple articles that we found recently. Catastrophe modelers are tackling climate change amid pressure from insurers. So insurers are getting beat up by climate change, which hopefully will have an effect at the national level and at least changing the dynamics of the need for a Green New Deal. The Green New Deal is vital, right? In terms of climate, but also economic well-being of our country. So hopefully some of this, well, we at Cuyahoga County are working as hard as possible to kind of mitigate and minimize our greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. We really need, it shouldn't be left up to us. There really needs to be a national program on this and national effort. Lastly, is my last slide, just some good resources on energy and climate. And you can Google these things, but these are daily news feeds that will come out. So Midwest Energy News is a great source for just kind of clean energy news in the Midwest. Great Lakes Daily News, it comes out of the Great Lakes Commission, and it deals with, a lot of it's dealing right now with high water levels and just kind of stories on the Great Lakes that look at environmental impacts of areas around the Great Lakes. And then the Energy Economics and Financial Analysis is just a wonderful, wonderful site that looks at kind of the economics and financing issues going on in all sorts of energies, with a kind of a bias in terms of thinking about how this affects clean energy, it doesn't, hurts coal and kind of fossil fuel energy. So it really is a good resource. And the nice thing about these guys is they're based out of Cleveland, Ohio. So there's some really smart economists who work on this thing, and it's a kind of a local product. They've got people all over the world who work for them, but they're based out of Cleveland. So with that, I will turn it over to Jonathan. And of course, anyone who wants to get a hold of me, there's my email.
Well, thank you, Mike. Thanks for all that information. And that's really interesting, some of the new programs that you have going on. It's very exciting news. As we said earlier, we will hold questions until after Jonathan presents. You can type them in as you think of them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we can ask those questions for you. or at the end, we will take questions. If you want to directly engage in conversation with our presenters, you can raise your hand. Somebody brought it to my attention. On my screen, it's under reactions where you can raise your hand. They said that that's not where it is for them, so you might have to kind of look around on your navigation tools and see where it is. But so next up is Jonathan Well. Jonathan is one of the founding board members of Cleveland Owns. It's an incubator that helps to develop local groups that are looking to build wealth and power through collective ownership. In fact, I'm involved in one of his groups that he started, Lakewood Community Solar Co-op, and so I'm really glad he's presenting here tonight for us. And take it away, Jonathan.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here. And Mike, thanks for that. Thanks for that presentation. I'm especially grateful that after the first 10 minutes, you concluded with some of the great work that's happening here, because I admit I was having one of those like flashback moments to the scariness of the depth of what we're facing. And in fact, before I jump in, I wonder if that settled with anyone too, and if you join me maybe in just taking a minute to kind of like relax and maybe do just a quick breathing exercise. So if you're up for it, I'll invite you to join me for a minute just to kind of recenter and calm ourselves back down. If you just think about your seat on the seat and your back against the back of the chair. If you'd like, you can join me and close your eyes and take a few slow breaths in and out, and in and out. Maybe lift your shoulders up to your ears and roll your shoulders back and down against your spine to a relaxed position. And one more big breath in and out. And you can open your eyes. Thanks. That sometimes helps me feel more relaxed, particularly when we're dealing with heavy topics like how our country is going to respond to the climate crisis in the middle of the health crisis that we're living through. I want to check in on time. Kim, how long are we together tonight?
Linda, were we talking till 8:30 with questions and everything? Whoops. Okay. Can you unmute?
Yeah. So you know what? At one of the locations we posted this, we said 8:15. The other one we said 8:30. So if anybody was counting on leaving at 8:15, by all means, we will not be offended if that happens. But I would say that if we extend it to 8:30, I think that would be fine.
Okay. Thank you. That sounds great. Can everyone see my screen? I'm going to take that as a yes. I actually can't see anyone anymore once I share my screen. Kim, can everyone see my screen? Just want to make sure we got that. Okay,
yeah, it looks good.
Okay, great. The screen looks good. Yeah, well, I'm excited to be with everyone tonight. Oops, that was not the plan. I'm excited to be with everyone tonight because Cleveland Owns has been active for the past couple of years, and we've been up to a lot of great stuff that relates directly to this question of how in our region can we respond to the challenge that the climate crisis poses, and how does the Green New Deal, could the Green New Deal fit into the work that we're doing, and why both responding and responding through the Green New Deal are in fact urgent priorities. And I'd like to start by sharing a story. It was about August of 2018 when Mike Foley, of all people, introduced me to Cindy and Deborah, who are there, the two Black women in the middle of that picture. And that is me and Cindy and Deborah and the crew outside of the solar garden. You all may have seen this on Euclid Ave, like Euclid Ave and 123rd. There's a solar garden there with some solar panels. And I remember we were at Algebra Tea House on a very warm afternoon. Mike had connected us through email. And I sat down with Cindy and Deborah, meeting them for the very first time. And I asked them, you know, why, why they were excited about this project that Mike and I talked about. And they told me an interesting story. They said that the neighborhood that they live in, Huff, for 50 years had seen money leave, right? A deliberate disinvestment in a form of racialized capitalism, leaving Huff with less resources than ever before. And now all of a sudden in 2018 and still to today, you know, Huff is hot again, right? People want to be back in Huff, and slowly the investment is coming in, and it's happening much more quickly, right, than they expected. And what Cindy and Deborah told me was that they wanted to make sure that as that money came back into Huff, that the neighborhood where they had raised families, where they, you know, knew all their neighbors, had a lot of love, that became, that when that money moved back, that they still had a say in how that redevelopment happened. And so I said, well, what do you all want to do about that? And they looked at me across the table, and I remember Cindy said, you know, Jonathan, we want to build a community-owned solar garden. And we don't just want to build it, but we want to own it. Right? And in that brief interaction, they kind of distilled like 3 core insights that I just want to share with folks about the moment that we're in. So the first thing is that they recognize that the energy economy is changing. Something that was not feasible 10 years ago, a community-owned solar garden, is all of a sudden feasible due to the economics of solar and the urgent need for renewables in our grid. 2, that only through organizing our communities that have been historically left out of the economic benefits of prosperity in this country, that they're going to have a seat at that table. And that 3, for those real benefits, for the benefits of that to really accrue to the residents like Cindy and Deborah and Huff, that they know that they need to own what comes out of that, right? I mean, some folks, you know, would take this slide and describe this in a different phrase. One of those phrases could be a just transition, right? That as we're living through this time of change, it is imperative. Like the only way we're going to build a more just world, in addition to a more sustainable world, is to apply these 3 principles. And those really make up the fundamental premise of what Cleveland Owns is all about. So Cleveland Owns is a nonprofit, because we figured that that's what Cleveland needs, is another nonprofit. We build cooperative businesses, which I think is different, which is why we wound up starting our own group. And the premise is that the only way we're going to have an equitable city is when we have an equitable distribution of ownership. And so while there are a lot of really powerful economic development groups throughout the city, very few of them talk about who owns what, right? And unless we're talking about who owns what, we're never going to really get to the crux of how decisions get made and who has the power to benefit, and who has the power essentially to control and make decisions about building a more equitable economy. So solar is one of the main ways in which we're doing some of this work. And so I mentioned the work with Cindy and Deborah. I'll tell you more about that in a second. Just a quick moment on kind of our method. Our method is trying to combine the best of community organizing, the idea of bringing folks together for the first time, finding a shared purpose, building community, building a structure that will sustain those efforts, with what we know is necessary, which is the financial expertise to really develop a business, financial legal expertise to really develop a business. And we're trying to operate kind of in both those worlds, which again, we think is a little bit different than how most groups work in the city. And that's what's led us down a path of doing a variety of projects I'd like to tell you about. First, I'll show you a picture. This is Mordecai. He's our board chair, and this is at our launch event last September, where we got folks together basically just to talk about co-ops, and Kim was part of that, and some other folks have been involved on the call. And so it was a delicious quiche served in Glenville, and we hope to be, you know, the pictures I'm showing you like are bittersweet because they speak to a better time, right? When we could like leave the house and like commune with friends and family. I miss that, but we'll hopefully be able to recreate that sooner rather than later. Here's another picture. You're going to see some pictures of people happily talking about energy policy. One of the things that we've done is we've convened groups, first in Lakewood, like Kim mentioned, second in Detroit Shoreway, where I used to live, and third in Cleveland Heights, to talk about energy policy, and specifically to talk about the ways in which new policies around how our energy system work can be a catalyst for economic development, can be a catalyst for the group decision making that will be necessary if we're really going to find a more just version of our current energy system. I think that groups like this are so important for a couple of reasons. You know, when I interpret the Green New Deal's language around local decision making, you know, my understanding is that for that to really work, it takes more than just elected officials and public administrators like Mike to do that work for us. I think some of that work actually has to happen at the community level, where residents who aren't super informed, right, are coming together to get smart on something and to make decisions that are going to impact their families and their neighbors. And so one of the things that we're working on, Cleveland Owns believes in, is that practice of working together to come together to make decisions across class and across race, decisions on topics that we're just all learning together, is a really powerful practice, and one that must be essential as we think about applying, for example, the Green New Deal. So for example, I don't think it's enough that the Green New Deal just allocates billions of dollars for all the types of projects that we know we need in Ohio. I hope that happens, and I'm excited to see that day. But for those monies to be spent wisely, we also need really activated groups that are good at doing this type of local decision making. So that's part of our mission at Cleveland Owns, is to learn how to do that along with folks. And you know, here's a picture of some of the crew doing just that. I'll tell you more about some of our projects. We have some of our work is building co-ops. Since the pandemic, we've also started working on advocacy. And this is new for us, and we're doing it directly in response to the crisis. Some of that advocacy looked like this campaign I'm showing you a picture of now. We had a petition to pressure First Energy to really commit to, in a more public way, ensuring that everyone had electricity during the pandemic. So we called on them to do a few things to be more transparent about how they're reconnecting folks. And we called on them to also commit to a 60-day moratorium after the end of Ohio's state of emergency, right? Because we know there's kind of this fiscal cliff. And when the state of emergency ends, the concern is that many households who've been accruing debt and have lost their incomes will fall off that cliff and see disconnection. So we're pushing them to do better than they had been doing. And this is new for us. You can see some of our partners. We're really proud to work with Sunrise, CCPC, Black Lives Matter, Cleveland. We're actually starting a statewide version of this, and this is new. We just had a call today with 16 different partner groups from across the region and from across the state, including Cincinnati, Central Ohio, to think about pressuring Governor DeWine to take statewide action to build a more humane response to this crisis from the perspective of electric, water, gas, and broadband utilities during this time. So if that's something that interests folks, I'll leave my email, and we'd love to connect with groups such as this one and other groups who might be represented on the call to join that coalition in lifting up a demand to Governor DeWine. See, unlike Mike, I get to be a little more edgy, which is fun part of what we're doing at Cleveland Owns, is because as a nonprofit, we have autonomy to take some risks. And I believe that if we're not, sometimes Cleveland Owns is not feeling a little uncomfortable, then we're not taking enough risks to do the work that we know we need to do to see progress on clean energy in Ohio. And just to be clear, I mean, one version of that is it's incredibly obvious that First Energy is the biggest obstacle to progress on clean energy in the state. And we believe that unless we directly say that and directly call First Energy out for that, they are in a position to stymie even the best of efforts from something like the Green New Deal. And so we know that it's going to take grassroots power, people like us on this call, people in this region and across the state, to actually stand up and have a clear voice in describing the energy system that we deserve rather than the one that we have. Let me describe another project, which is the Cleveland Solar Cooperative. The Cleveland Solar Cooperative is officially an Ohio registered cooperative enterprise, and it's made up of member owners who come together and essentially pool their money and buy solar panels. And this diagram outlines this. Buy solar panels and they put them on the roof of a host. So that's letter B. And the host could be a homeowner, it could be a small business or a nonprofit. And then that homeowner or that host receives the benefits of net metering. So that's letter C. So, you know, every unit, every kilowatt that the panels produce on their roof, they see that savings on their bill. And then they will return some of that savings to the solar cooperative. And the solar cooperative, Cleveland Solar Cooperative, will repay its member owners. We've been working on this project for about 8 months or so. It started with a group in Lakewood that Kim mentioned, and Kim's been a part of. Adrian's been a part of that as well. Glad to see you both tonight. And has grown now to a group in Detroit Shoreway, and there's a burgeoning group in Cleveland Heights. And each of those groups are like little co-ops within the co-op. So there's the Cleveland Solar Co-op, and then sub-co-ops within those. And those groups will actually have a lot of autonomy over deciding how to raise money from their member owners and what to do with that money when there's profits. So it's sort of like a co-op of co-ops. And we took this model from a couple groups that are doing this really well with similar names: Cooperative Energy Futures in Minnesota, Co-op Power in Massachusetts, the People Power Solar Co-op in Oakland, California. All do a version of this. And we've found a way through Ohio's cooperative statute to get the securities exemption that we need to do something similar here. So we think this is pretty innovative, the first one in Ohio to our knowledge. And we hope to basically start working with homeowners and nonprofits to not only do rooftop solar, but to do rooftop solar that's owned by the community. So we haven't done our first project yet. We're in talks with 2 different hosts in the city of Cleveland, and we hope to have some good news for you soon. We're also going to open up membership soon. And when that does become available, which should be, I think, Kim, by the end of this month, we're on pace to open membership. Then what we'd love to do is invite everyone on this call to join. It's a $20 membership fee, which then allows you to make an investment if you want to. Investing is optional. And we'll have more chance to talk through that in greater detail once the membership is open. Kim, on this topic of Cleveland Solar Co-op, before I kind of close out, anything else that you think we want to make sure everyone on the call knows about Cleveland Solar Co-op and where we're at and what we're working on?
The only thing you do have in there about the net metering, and I think you might have mentioned virtual net metering on the HUF, but can you draw the distinction between the two? Because you know, we don't have that virtual net metering option since we're in First Energy's district.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely right. So what we're describing here is rooftop solar, and that uses net metering, right, where every kilowatt that's generated on the roof comes off your bill. In many states, there's a separate policy. It's called virtual net metering. And in virtual net metering, rather than panels on your roof, the panels are at the end of the street. And the power from those panels generate credits. And those credits get applied not to just your bill, but they could get applied to your bill and your neighbor's bill and the church down the street's bill and hundreds of people's bills. And that's called virtual net metering. So states like Minnesota, New Jersey, Colorado, Maryland, Massachusetts all have great versions of virtual net metering. Ohio does not, and that is deliberately the case because the utility companies have decided that they don't want to see community solar unless they control it. And they're trying to do that right now. Surprise, surprise, through the Ohio State House. Right now, it's illegal to do, it's very difficult to do a project like that. Mike Foley and the county managed to do something similar. They used a virtual net metering system for the county project, which is part of why it was celebrated and won Project of the Year. The catch is that while at the state level, it would require a state level action to make that happen. At the city level, in theory, Cleveland City Council could decide to allow virtual net metering, not just for one project, but for as many projects as it wanted to if it passed the right law. And so Cindy and Deborah and myself and the group in Huff, we're working with City Council to try to get community solar legislation passed so that we could authorize the project that Cindy and Deborah described to me that day in Algebra Tea House, and other projects like that. There are 5 square miles of vacant brownfield in the city of Cleveland, and a huge portion of that could be put to good use by hosting solar panels and generating clean renewable energy that are the solar panels owned by local residents who actually profit. So, you know, the vision that I have of what the Green New Deal means and what it looks like in the city of Cleveland is federal funding and federal policy to support exactly that. It is acres and acres of solar panels on rooftops, on vacant brownfields, on landfill in the city of Cleveland, owned by residents who are getting paid to own and generate power that goes into the grids and actually goes into the grid and actually powers their home. It looks like coalitions of neighbors having the relational power and the technical knowledge to come together to make big decisions. I mean, big decisions on how to spend huge allocations of funding. Hey, can you all hear me? Hey, can you all hear me okay? My screen told me I was muted.
Yeah, we can hear
cool.
you. Muted for a second, but you're back on. But we lost our presentation.
Oh yeah, well that was let me share just one more picture and I'll just wrap up here. Okay. You know, I'm getting carried away describing the world I want to see. When there's a Green New Deal, one of the things I'm really excited to see is groups of neighbors coming together like we're coming together at the Cleveland Solar Co-op and really figuring out how to do the hard work of making high stakes decisions together, right? That takes building trust, that takes building relationships, that takes building the structures that will allow us to trust a process for making decisions so that we don't need to rely on Governor DeWine, we don't need to rely on, you know, even County Executive Armin Budish to make decisions on our behalf, but we can do a much more democratic and direct process. And I think that's going to take, you know, some coaching and training leading up to that. And when the Green New Deal is passed, I'm most excited to see a version of it that leaves a lot of that decision making to grassroots groups like the group that we're meeting with right now, who care about this and who have passion for this and who are going to live with the impacts of how those decisions get made. You know, just a concluding comment here, right? Cleveland owns, we've got these 2 solar projects up and running. We're doing this advocacy work. And of course, you know, lots of opportunities for folks to get involved. In fact, the only way that we've made progress so far on community-owned solar, the Cleveland Solar Cooperative, or the advocacy work that we've done is because there's a network of about 50 people throughout the city who've been putting time and energy into building a more democratic energy system, one where people have an ownership stake and real power in making decisions about what happens. And of course, we invite you to join us. I'll drop my email in the chat and we'll stick around for questions. Thanks.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. I get really excited when you start talking about the cooperative. So first of all, I guess I'll kick off with a question to get some discussion going with Mike and Jonathan while people either raise their hands or put their questions in the chat. And then Linda, are you going to be doing the chat questions? Yeah. I think you're still muted.
Okay, yes, we have a couple here, but go ahead.
Oh, no, if we've got some already, go ahead. I didn't see them. So you're right. You're the only one that's getting them. I forgot that. So yeah, go right ahead with those.
Okay, well, so I'm just going to go way back to when Mike was talking. The question was, how can we educate the public about the safety of reusable bags that can be cleaned and sanitized versus single-use bags that have been receiving droplets from sitting in stores all day. Droplets mean like hot, yeah.
Yeah, it's look, it's a hard thing to do right now. I mean, there's great anxiety around coronavirus and COVID-19, no doubt about it. And I, you know, it's what actually we at the county are trying to think about how we do that. We've got a good communications team, and we've been meeting with grocers, actually, who are, some allied grocers who are really interested in getting rid of plastic bags because it costs them money, to be honest with you. So I think it's something that I think it has to be a real communication kind of campaign almost to support use of reusable bags and understand why they're important and why they are safe. But it's also got to be based on science. So there's been some science out there kind of basically in both ways saying that reusable bags have potentially more germs on them, others that say they don't. So those are things we're going to have to get clarity on, and as soon as we do, then we're working on a campaign just to kind of talk about that.
All right. So the next question, and this is again for Mike, is Cleveland Public Power working with the county on reducing emissions?
Cleveland Public Power has their own utility, and the city of Cleveland has their own emission reduction goals. So Cleveland Public Power is obviously part of the city of Cleveland. They have lines in about 2/3 of the city of Cleveland. So they're working with us. They were helpful with us when we did our Brooklyn Solar project, which took a lot of work. It was kind of first of its kind, and as we talked about, and they're working with us on this microgrid. They've got struggles. They've got they've got a big utility, First Energy, that's kind of all around them, surrounding them, and also runs lines through the city of Cleveland. So they compete on a day-to-day basis with First Energy, and they are, my sense is they're trying to minimize as much as possible their greenhouse gas emissions. They're working under the city guidelines that tell them they have to get reduced by 25% by the year 2025 from, I forget what from 2010 guideline, baseline. So they're doing that, but I think they also could use some support and help as much as possible, because they're competing every day with one of the largest utility companies in the country, who's trying to undercut them in terms of pricing.
Okay. All right. So we have a question for Jonathan. Are there any concessions from First Energy that are needed before Cleveland Solar Cooperative can begin installing panels on the roof of its first host property, or can Cleveland Solar Cooperative begin right away?
We can begin right away.
Okay. That was okay. So then I'm going to ask another one, and if Glenn, if you want to follow up on that, please post it in there, and I can follow up. But so we've got another one for Mike. How in the coming years, how many climate refugees can Ohio expect to move to our state or Northeast Ohio?
Yeah, it's a good question, and no one knows this, right? So as we're kind of looking at trying to identify and describe, where we fit in the world in terms of climate, it's cities across the Midwest are actually starting to look at this. So David Nader, who's on the call right now, has been doing research just on Midwestern cities and how they're trying to I don't think take advantage is the right word, but at least understand and describe kind of our differences as compared to the rest of the country. So Duluth, Minnesota, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati have all started kind of thinking about this independently almost, and there's been articles written about it. Where we're in a more climate safe position than a lot of other places, especially the coastal regions. We've got fresh water, right? We've got Lake Erie and the Great Lakes in our backyards, and that's an immensely important resource. So as other places have less water or have too much water, we think that there's going to be more refugees coming to the place where there is more water and where there's less climate disruption, and that's going to be the Midwest. What that number is, I can't tell you right now, and I don't think anyone can.
Okay. All right. I'm going to unmute Dorothy because Dorothy had a question about the weather charts.
I was very impressed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was very impressed, Mike, with that weather chart because it dawned on me after United Airlines left the city as a hub that every time there were problems in other cities near us, we weren't having those same problems. And I thought, why doesn't the airline wake up and look at these weather patterns and see ours? So I'd never seen this kind of a chart before, and I was very impressed. I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but to me, economically, it has a lot of sense to it.
Yeah, and so that chart was based on natural disasters. And there's a different chart, and I apologize I didn't kind of overlay it, but we've got one that also kind of fits in just climate resiliency, issues too. But it shows like kind of we're in a safe place. There was, I think there was an article last year, I forget who did this, Trulia, Zillow, or one of those kind of real estate agencies, national real estate firms, said we're the second safest city in terms of natural disasters in the country, next to Syracuse, New York.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
So those are, for a city that, for a region that's been hit hard through kind of the contradictions of, the problems of our economic system in this country over the last 50 years, then, we're, to see us potentially as a place where there could be more economic activity because of our geography is kind of an interesting thing.
Okay. All right, good, thank you. So the next question is about the microgrid. I'm interested in the microgrid concept and specifically the islanded mode. And how will this islanded mode take form and interact with the existing grid? And how does that scale relate to the scale of a community cooperative?
So there's lots of microgrids in the world right now. So a lot of them are behind, we're called behind the meter. So they're college campuses potentially have microgrids, Air Force bases. There are some, companies and facilities and big buildings that have microgrids. So if the grid goes down, they've got battery backup or they've got battery storage that can keep them up. Our microgrid would be what's called, as we conceive this, would be the first district-wide microgrid in the country. So it'd be, as we're conceiving it right now, it's about a 5 square mile district between East 55th, roughly, and the river and maybe Carnegie or the highway to the lake. So it's about a 5 square mile area where people can tap into it, and there'd be equipment put into your lines to protect you if the grid went down. You may pay a little bit more for your electricity than the normal customer, but you're guaranteed this kind of 5/9 power that is part of it. And we've had great, as I said, we've had great interest from really sophisticated and smart developers out in the world, not just the United States, but in the world in this concept. One of the advantages we have is we've got Cleveland Public Power, which has the ability and has underground electric lines running from East 55th to downtown. So there's already this kind of protection for some of the infrastructure that already exists. And we have some other natural advantages and potentially in terms of local generation of electricity as well. So the big picture is that a business that really needs high resilient power, and Cleveland State has done some analysis on this of businesses that really need, not all businesses, if the grid goes down and their business goes down, it's a inconvenience, they can deal with it. But there's some businesses that especially really need to have high resilient power. And maybe they have medical experiments going on. Maybe they've got some, manufacturing going on that they can't have go down for a time frame. and they're paying for that when their grid power does go down. So it's called the value of lost load, and we've done this analysis on the value of lost load and identified these sectors of the economy that we think would really want to tap into this microgrid and be willing to come to Cleveland just to open up shop, so that they don't have to buy their own generation, a backup generation for their own facilities. They can just tap into this microgrid rather than expending all this money on their own battery backup or other generation, local generation source. So that's the big concept. That's the concept, and we think it's got a lot of promise. But also we've got some validation because we've got some really, I think, high-powered kind of interested parties from outside the county who are interested in it as well. And lastly, one of the things and especially in the site, one of the things is we're looking not to, if we can avoid having county money or city money being spent on this, we want to do that. We want people to bring their own money. And at least these 8 developers who we've been talking to have all indicated that they could bring their own money to develop the microgrid. So it would be basically a concession on the Cleveland Public Power lines to run this microgrid. And they think they can operate it, and they'll make their money back by selling electricity at that little bit higher rate.
Okay, I've got to follow up that, and then 2 more, and then Nina, I'll unmute you. Okay, so the follow-up to that is that area roughly occupies Cleveland's 2030 district. Is there any involvement with the Cleveland 2030 or the 2030 district?
Yeah, so the Cleveland 2030 district is a business district downtown that just thinks about kind of clean energy and greenhouse gas emission reductions. Cindy Goy is their director, and they've been great. They've helped put together kind of almost marketing to local companies to help think about, hey, would you be interested in being a microgrid customer if we get this thing up and running? So they've been wonderful.
Okay. All right, so this is for Jonathan. So have you included the large area of parking lots in the land available for solar? Canopies over lots could be owned by the lot owners, or maybe community solar leasing their overhead area.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. The model works pretty well for a project exactly like that. Those projects tend to be a little bit more expensive, and so we would need to understand kind of economics of what it costs to put in a canopy over a parking lot rather than put panels onto a rooftop. But that ownership model could work just as well. You could net meter that that parking lot canopy through the meter of the host building. And you just have to have a payback period. It'd probably be a little bit longer. I suspect the payback period would be quite a bit longer because those projects cost, I've heard estimates of 15% more than a typical rooftop, but I've also heard almost twice as much as a typical rooftop project. So you have to see where the bids come in at.
Okay. All right. And Nina, you had a question? So I just unmuted you. So you can talk. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted again. Here you go. Let me try it another way.
Oh.
Okay, go ahead.
I actually have 2 questions for Mike. First of all, in the plans for electric car plug-ins, is that connected with solar so that it isn't pulling from, bad energy? So that the stations that have solar panels.
Yeah, so initially, no. So there's NOACA is putting together kind of a plan of where we want to put charging stations, and it's looking at kind of the first iteration of it right now is looking at where there are high concentrations of needs for workplace charging. So we're looking at places like downtown, University Circle, out by the airport, and it's basically getting that infrastructure there so people feel comfortable. They minimize their anxiety about driving an electric vehicle from one place to another. They can charge up their workplace and come home and go back to wherever else they need. So it's right now we're so far behind in terms of not having infrastructure that it's just trying to think about where we should be putting infrastructure at to begin with in order to make people comfortable purchasing electric vehicles. The second part, I mean, what's the energy source for that? It's going to, part of this is we're still figuring that out, so who's going to own those charging stations is one thing. So maybe it's a parking lot owner out in University Circle somewhere. Where are they getting their electricity from? I don't know we can control that yet. Those are things I think we're going to have to work on as we think through this in the future.
My second question has to do with the green bank. Doesn't sound much like a real bank. The public banks, like in, what is it, North Dakota, I think, or South Dakota. I mean, people like me could put my money into it and get some interest back, but put my money where we think it could do some good. So could it eventually move in that direction?
Eventually it could. Probably starting off with, it'll be government and philanthropic money, so foundation dollars. And it won't be a depository bank where people could put their own money into. It doesn't mean that it can't be that way in the future. I should tell you though that the green banks that exist now, they're funds, right? They're basically investment funds to help on clean energy projects. New York, Connecticut, Maryland, there's those kind of banks are not depository banks yet, because I think they're just trying to get the scale as much as possible, and trying to fund projects as much as possible. And kind of being a depository bank is I think it's a complication right now that is kind of, I don't know, say above their pay grade, but they're not ready to take on yet. And I don't know that we're going to be ready to take that on for as an issue for a couple years down the road.
All right. So the next question has to do with Sherwin-Williams. Is there anything going on in Cleveland about the new Sherwin-Williams buildings related to energy issues?
I've not been involved in the Sherwin-Williams discussions, thank goodness. I'm going to tell you that up front. They are interested in the microgrid. I know that though, and so they are. They've actually written a letter saying that if the microgrid got up and running, they would be interested in being a potential off-taker of that power. But in terms of other kind of corporate decisions they're making around energy, issues, I just haven't had conversations with them, or I'm not in a position to have conversation with them. I guess I just don't know. So.
Okay. All right, and then I think Kim's got some questions.
Yes, I do. So I was reading recently about PG&E out in California, how they were responsible for so many of those wildfires that claimed lives and caused billions of dollars worth of damage, and that the resulting lawsuits caused them to file for bankruptcy. And of course, the residents that were affected by this were outraged and were calling for the state to not, to buy them out, to basically dissolve their organization. And they were considering it, but in the end they bailed them out, which was a cost that PG&E ended up offloading to the customers in the form of higher rates, which just added insult to injury for some of these customers whose family members had died in these fires, that now they have to pay the cost of suing, But anyway, so even in such an extreme situation as that, the citizens out in California were unable to finally wrestle PG&E into non-existence. What would it take? Because we've had our own problems here with First Energy in Ohio. Having to bail them out, the way that they stand in the way of us making any kind of forward progress on renewables in the state. They gutted the renewable portfolio standards, all that stuff. What would it take? Is there any way that we could get rid of First Energy, buy them out? What do you guys, both of you, I'm curious to see what you think on this. What would it take?
Jonathan, I'll let you start, and then I'll add color later after your comments.
I mean, we're not passive bystanders in all of this. Each of those things that you mentioned happened, and they happened while we all lived here and watched this happen, right? Like, and we continue, and every time we pay a bill to First Energy, we are allowing that, we are authorizing what their malfeasance. Which is to say that we have more power and agency in this situation than it seems. I'm excited to see a world in which the residents of Lakewood are putting pressure on Lakewood City Council to make demands of the only utility that serves their constituents, right? So other cities have done this. One of the things you left out of the story of PG&E, which I think you told very well, is that the city of San Francisco made a bid to buy PG&E's electricity infrastructure in the city of San Francisco for $2 billion. And they want to kick PG&E out. They want to keep the wires where they are, and they want to start a municipal electric utility to run that power and that whole system more effectively, more humanely, more safely, more sustainably than PG&E has done. And the city of Lakewood, the city of Cleveland Heights, any municipality in the state of Ohio has the same right. And I believe that First Energy's power will continue to hold until we have citizens and municipalities around Northeast Ohio pressuring their city councils to threaten to withdraw the one thing that keeps First Energy alive, which is our revenue.
And this is Mike, and I'll just, Johnny, are you done, or can I jump in?
I'm done.
Yeah. So, yeah. So distribution of electricity, right? So we all have the right to buy our generation portion of our electricity from anyone we want to, and it's not, and we've got choice in the state. You can buy clean energy, green energy from Texas wind or Iowa wind or solar on the East Coast, whatever you want to do. It's the wires, right? How does that electricity get transferred from that place to our homes or our businesses is the distribution portion. And Jonathan's right. First Energy has the vast majority of the lines and therefore a lot of control over how, what our electric policy is in the state of Ohio. It's why I think that Cleveland Public Power is really vital and interesting. They're a municipally owned utility that is owned by by the city, by the people of the city of Cleveland, right? City council sets their policy, so there's democratic control over the utility, and that's why there's 50 such entities in the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio Constitution gives every city in the state the ability to start up their own municipal utility if they want to, electric utility if they want to. So I think there's been a sea change just in kind of the anger. Yeah, I don't know what the right word is, but Jonathan's right. First Energy has a lot of control and a lot of say over utility policy and energy policy in this state, and they haven't been on the side of renewables and clean energy by any stretch of the imagination. And so if they're not playing ball, then what are the options to figure out how to get around them? And I think this idea of municipal utilities reinvestigating or kind of bringing up municipal utilities may be a way to move in the future. They were part of the progressive movement back in the early 20th century. They were kind of democratically owned, collectively owned entities to get power to people. Their mission is to provide power not for profit but for people. So I think those are there needs to be kind of a rethinking, I guess, of looking at cities and their abilities to organize these things.
Okay. So I'm going to ask one other question that was posted here. What are your thoughts about purchasing renewable energy credit RECs? And would this put would this put pressure on First Energy to do that?
Oh, Jonathan, you want to start off with this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't put any pressure on First Energy. RECs are kind of an accounting system, And the metric that I'm most interested in is what is the mix of power of the electrons actually flowing into my house, because it's really the only way that we can be sure that that there's generation of clean renewable energy happening locally. So yes, I think it makes sense when when the only option is like power without RECs or power with RECs, I would choose power with RECs, because somewhere we can hope and pray that that is sending a market signal to the wind producers in Texas to keep doing what they're doing, which I think they should be doing. However, the solution, as the Green New Deal recognizes, the solution actually needs to be local generation of clean renewable energy. And so while RECs are probably better than nothing, there's a real danger in seeing RECs as a solution. I do not ascribe to that. Mike may have different ideas. I think they are a temporary fix at best, one that I've opted into when I can, but I don't feel bad when I can't, because I know that ultimately they're not the solution.
Oh, yeah. Look, I just go back. You can buy clean energy in Ohio through the apples to apples comparison on the PUCO website, and you should do that where possible. But Jonathan, you should do that, right? You should obviously do that. But I think Jonathan is right, and I think the Green New Deal concept is right, is that there needs to be as much locally generated clean energy as possible, and that's why the Green New Deal is really, really important, I think.
I have another question if we don't have one from any other participants right now, Linda.
Well, there's a suggestion here about cities buying wires, because building new wires is very expensive. And how viable is it to just have cities buy the wires or take them by public domain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, eminent domain is probably the most likely mechanism for converting to a municipal electric utility. That's what PG&E is trying to use eminent domain plus San Francisco is trying to use eminent domain plus a market rate offer. But if they don't take if PG&E doesn't take the market rate offer, San Francisco has the right to use eminent domain to begin those proceedings.
Okay.
But the other thing, can I just add, is that a city doesn't have to take over the whole grid, right? So you could start off small. You could do a commercial district. You could start off with street lights. Street lights are really expensive to own and operate and maintain and power. And so, maybe you just start off with kind of slices of your grid and expand later on down the road.
Okay, Dorothy just reminded me that it's 8:30. So how about if, Kim, do you want to ask your question and then we'll have to wrap it up?
Yeah, my concern is just like they've talked about coming up with new technologies to address decarbonization, some new, something that'll carbon capture, and using market forces like carbon taxes or cap and trade, things like that, to try to influence the private sector to moving towards fewer emissions and stuff. And a lot of proponents for the Green New Deal, question these various strategies, especially these R&D technologies, because who's going to hold the patents on these? Is it going to be held by another private industry that's going to, make it expensive and accessible, whatever? I'd like to see these things in much the same way that the county has been putting these solar arrays out there. Is it possible that if these cooperatives, these community cooperatives were up and running, that they could act as the developer instead of a large AEP that, maybe isn't even located locally? You know what I'm saying? Keep the money local. Is that concerning at all for either of you?
I think that's the goal. I think that's what Jonathan's been, I think that's what Cleveland owns, and you guys have been involved in. It's just as much as possible. Yeah, try. Look, we've got 10 to 15 years to really get a handle on climate change, right? And get as much scale as possible. You know, I always tell people I've got 4 kids who I love to death, and it scares the heck out of me what the world looks like in 15, 20, 30 years from now, unless we do something now. And so scale and fast action is really important. You know, it probably means, unfortunately, that there's going to have to be big players who are involved in this and owning, you know, large amounts of production or generation at some point. But to the extent we can get as much local generation and much democratic ownership over the generation of electricity as possible, that's really important as well. And I think that's why Cleveland owns and the Green New Deal are really, really important.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just put one bow on that, which is your capitalism got us into this problem. And I do not believe that the same version of capitalism is going to get us out of this problem. So we're working to reform that.
Awesome, thank you. Do you want to wrap us up, Linda? Or do you want me to? Okay, I will then. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you, Mike Foley and Jonathan Well, for presenting on our subject matter tonight. Loved all the information, loved the hopefulness of what you guys have in the works. And hopefully everybody can be involved on this in some way. And have a good evening. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you. And
Thanks so much.
you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, I'm just seeing if I can save some of these chats. Okay. And I recorded all that. I hope you guys are okay with that. Got this. I don't remember where it's even at.